The call came on a Tuesday.
I must this
Grace
person
Morrison
first
stood in the
home.
break room
Ruin!
of
You
Spokane
dare
Veterans
defy
Hospital.
me!
I
Her
must this
coffee
person
growing
first
cold
home.
in her hand
Ruin!
as she
I
stared
point-
at the number on her phone screen. Unknown. Local area code. She almost didn't answer. Dr. Morrison? The voice was male, older, careful. This is Dr. Henry Caldwell from Riverside Medical Center. I'm calling about your father. Grace's hand tightened around the cup. 20 years, and still the word landed like a punch. Father. As if Thomas Morrison had earned that title, as if he hadn't forfeited it the night he killed her brother. I don't have a father, she said quietly. A pause. Then softer, Grace, I understand. But Thomas is dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. He has maybe 2 weeks. He's asking for you. She should have hung up, should have blocked the number and gone back to her patients, to the shattered veterans she spent her days trying to piece back together. Instead, she heard herself ask, why now? He says there's something you need to know about the night David died. The cup slipped from her fingers, hit the linoleum floor. Brown liquid spread across white tile like old blood. Grace hadn't spoken her brother's name aloud in years. The drive to Riverside Medical Center took 17 minutes. Grace counted every one of them, her hands steady on the wheel, her heart a drumbeat of rage she'd carried for 2 decades. David would have been 36 now, would have been a father himself probably, would have taught his kids to throw a baseball the way he'd tried to teach Grace, back when she was small enough to believe her big brother would live forever. Instead, David Morrison died at 16, crumpled in the passenger seat of their father's truck, while Thomas walked away with nothing but a concussion and a blood alcohol level of 0.08. Just over the legal limit, just drunk enough to kill his son. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty. Grace sat in her car for 5 minutes, staring at the entrance, telling herself she could still leave. She owed Thomas Morrison nothing. Not her time, not her presence, and certainly not her forgiveness. But Dr. Caldwell had said David's name, had said there was something she needed to know. She got out of the car. Dr. Henry Caldwell was waiting in the 3rd-floor hallway, a tall man with silver hair and the kind of face that had seen too much suffering to be surprised by any of it. He looked at Grace with something close to pity, and she hated him for it. Thank you for coming, he said. I haven't decided to stay. He nodded as if he'd expected that. Room 317. But Grace, there's something you should know first. Your father slipped into a coma this morning. He may not wake up. Good, Grace thought. Let him die without absolution. Let him carry his guilt into whatever darkness waited beyond. But Dr. Caldwell was holding out a wooden box, small and square, the kind Thomas used to make in his workshop when Grace was a child. Before he became the kind of man who drank and drove, before he became a killer. He left this for you, Caldwell said. Asked me to give it to you if he couldn't speak. Grace took the box. It was lighter than she expected, smooth under her fingers. No note on the outside, no explanation, just raw cedar, expertly joined, smelling faintly of sawdust and time. I'm also his friend, Caldwell added quietly. Have been for 15 years. He's a good man, Grace. I know you don't believe that, but he is. A good man doesn't abandon his family. No, Caldwell agreed, but sometimes a broken man doesn't know how to stay. Room 317 was dim, curtains drawn against the afternoon light. The man in the bed looked nothing like the father Grace remembered. Thomas Morrison had been broad-shouldered, rough-handed, always smelling of wood shavings and Old Spice. The man in the bed was skeletal, his skin gray, his breathing shallow and mechanical. Tubes ran from his arms. Monitors beeped soft rhythms of a life barely clinging. Grace stood in the doorway and felt absolutely nothing. That was a lie. She felt everything. Rage and grief and a desperate, furious hope that he would wake up just long enough for her to tell him exactly what his absence had cost. How many nights her mother had cried herself to sleep. How many times Grace had walked past David's empty bedroom and wanted to scream. How she'd graduated high school, college, medical school, and he hadn't been there for any of it. How she'd become a doctor who specialized in healing trauma because she couldn't heal her own. He looks peaceful, doesn't he? Grace turned. Dr. Caldwell had followed her in, stood now at the foot of the bed with his hands in his pockets. He doesn't deserve peace, Grace said. Maybe not. But Grace, before you leave, open the box, please. She looked down at the cedar square in her hands. Part of her wanted to throw it in the trash. Part of her wanted to smash it against the wall, to break it the way Thomas had broken their family. Instead, she lifted the lid. Inside were journals, 20 of them, small and leather-bound, stacked with the precision of someone who had nothing left but order. On top was a photograph, David at 15, grinning at the camera, holding a basketball. Grace remembered taking that picture. Remembered how her brother had complained about her terrible photography skills, how he'd laughed when she'd threatened to put it in the school yearbook. Beneath the photo was a letter, handwritten, the ink slightly faded. Grace, if you're reading this, I'm either dead or close to it. I won't ask you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve that. But I'm asking you to read these journals. Not for my sake, for yours and for David's. There are things you don't know about the night he died, things I couldn't tell you then, things I still don't know how to say. I love you, Gracie. I always have, even when I wasn't there to show it. Dad. Grace's fingers trembled as she set the letter down, opened the first journal. The date on the first page was 20 years ago, 1 week after David's funeral. The handwriting was barely legible, shaky, desperate. Day 7. Grace looked at me today like I was a stranger. Worse than a stranger. Like I was the monster under her bed, the nightmare she couldn't wake from. She's right, I am. I see David every time I close my eyes. I see him in the passenger seat, blood on his face, his eyes open and empty. I see the speedometer, 70 and a 45. I see the telephone pole coming, and I can't stop, can't turn, can't do anything but kill my son. The police said I was over the limit. .08. They're wrong, I only had 1 beer, 1. But it doesn't matter, drunk or sober, I'm the reason David is dead. I went to Grace's room tonight, stood outside her door and listened to her cry. I wanted to go in, wanted to hold her the way I did when she was small and had nightmares. But how do you comfort someone when you're the nightmare? I'm leaving tomorrow. Not because I want to, because if I stay, Grace will have to look at me every day for the rest of her life. She'll have to see the man who killed her brother. She'll never heal, never move on, never be free. So I'm going, and I'm praying that my absence hurts less than my presence. I'm so sorry, David. I'm so sorry, Gracie. I don't know how to live with this. Grace read the entry 3 times. Then she closed the journal and set it carefully back in the box, her breathing controlled despite the tremor in her fingers. She looked at the man in the bed, this stranger who had written those words, and felt the first crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. Dr. Caldwell was watching her. There are 19 more, he said softly. 1 for every year he's been gone. He wrote in them every week, sometimes every day. Why didn't he send them? He thought you deserved better than words, better than excuses. Grace laughed, sharp and bitter. So he gave me nothing instead. No, he gave you space. He gave you a chance to grow up without him, to become who you are without his shadow. I became who I am because of his shadow. Caldwell nodded. I know. He knew that too. It's why he stayed away. Grace took a chair beside the bed. She didn't know why. Didn't know what she was waiting for. Thomas's breathing was steady, mechanical, the ventilator doing the work his body could no longer manage. His face was slack, expressionless. There was no recognition, no awareness. He was already gained in all the ways that mattered. She opened the second journal. The entries were longer now, more detailed. Thomas had left Spokane the week after David's funeral, driven east with nothing but a duffel bag and his grandfather's tools. He'd found work in Montana, framing houses, building decks. He wrote about the physical exhaustion, the way his body ached at the end of each day, the way the pain felt like penance. He wrote about Grace, day 43, called the house today, hung up when Emma answered. I just wanted to hear her voice, wanted to know if Grace was okay. But what right do I have to know? What right do I have to anything? I sent money today, $2,000. Put it in an envelope, mailed it from a town 3 hours away so they can't trace it. I don't know if Emma will accept it, don't know if she'll burn it, but it's all I can give them, money and distance. I saw a girl today who looked like Grace, same dark hair, same serious eyes. She was walking with her father, holding his hand, laughing at something he said. I wanted to die. Grace's chest constricted. She set the journal down, pressed her fingers to her eyes. She would not cry. Not here. Not for him. But the image was there now, planted in her mind. Thomas standing on some street corner in Montana, watching a father and daughter bleeding from wounds no one could see. He sent money, she asked. Caldwell nodded. Every month for 15 years, anonymous wire transfers. He thought if you knew it was from him, you'd refuse it. We would have. I know. Grace picked up the third journal. The entries were darker now, filled with self-loathing and despair. Thomas wrote about sleepless nights, about waking up screaming, about the taste of bourbon and the way it didn't help. He wrote about standing on a bridge in Idaho, looking down at the water, trying to find a reason not to jump. Day 112. Almost did it today. Stood on the rail, felt the wind, heard the river. It would be easy. Just let go. Just stop. But then I thought, what if Grace finds out? What if she blames herself? What if she thinks I killed myself because I couldn't stand to think about her? I can't do that to her. I've already taken her brother. I can't take her father too, even if I'm a father in name only. So I got down, drove to a meeting instead, fourth one this month. Hi, my name is Thomas, and I'm an alcoholic. Except I'm not. I'm just a coward who can't live with what he's done. The counselor says I have PTSD, says I need medication, therapy, time. I told him I don't deserve to feel better. He said that's the PTSD talking. I don't know what to believe anymore. Grace looked up at the man in the bed. His chest rose and fell, steady and slow. The ventilator hissed. Outside, a cart rattled past in the hallway. He was sick, she said. Not a question. Severe depression, PTSD. He was hospitalized twice in the first 5 years. Suicide attempts. Grace's fingers clenched. And you're telling me this why? So I'll feel sorry for him? No, so you'll understand that he didn't leave because he didn't love you. He left because he did. That's not love, that's cowardice. Caldwell was quiet for a long moment. Then, maybe it's both. Grace read through the night. The journals painted a portrait of a man she'd never known, a man who'd spent 20 years punishing himself in ways no court ever could. Thomas had moved from town to town, taking work where he could find it, never staying long enough to form attachments. He'd attended AA meetings even though he wasn't drinking. He'd seen therapists, taken medication, tried to claw his way back to something resembling sanity. And every week, without fail, he'd written to Grace. Not letters he intended to send. Just words in a journal, confessions to a daughter who would never read them. He wrote about her high school graduation, which he'd watched from the back of the auditorium, leaving before the ceremony ended. He wrote about her college acceptance letter, which he'd learned about through a private investigator he'd hired to send him updates. He wrote about the day she'd been accepted to medical school and how he'd cried in a motel room in Wyoming, proud and heartbroken, and so desperately lonely, he couldn't breathe. Day 2841. Grace is a doctor now, a real doctor. She specializes in trauma psychology, works with veterans at the VA hospital in Spokane. Of course she does. Of course my brilliant, beautiful girl chose to spend her life healing the broken. It's who she is, who she's always been. I wonder if she knows she's healing me too, even from 1,000 miles away. Every time I think about her, about the life she's built, the people she's helping, I remember that I didn't destroy everything. I destroyed David. I destroyed our family, but I didn't destroy Grace. She survived me. She thrived despite me. That has to be enough. Grace closed the journal, her eyes burning. The sky outside was beginning to lighten, dawn creeping across the eastern horizon. She'd been reading for 8 hours. Her back ached. Her muscles felt stiff. But she couldn't stop. There were 12 journals left. The later journals were different. Less raw grief, more quiet resignation. Thomas had settled in a small town in eastern Washington 5 years ago, close enough to Spokane that he could drive there in an hour if he needed to. He'd taken a job at a woodworking shop, teaching carpentry to at-risk youth. He wrote about the kids, about their stories, about how they reminded him of David. He wrote about seeing Grace, day 6,290. Saw Gracie today. Drove to Spokane, parked across from the hospital, watched her leave at the end of her shift. She looks like her mother. Same walk, same way of holding herself. Confident, strong. She was laughing with a colleague, some younger doctor. The sound of her laugh hit me like a bullet. I haven't heard her laugh in 20 years. I wanted to cross the street, wanted to call her name, wanted to fall on my knees and beg her forgiveness. But I didn't, because she doesn't need my forgiveness. She needs her peace, and I'm not part of that peace. I drove home, made a rocking chair for the Peterson baby, sanded it until my hands bled. It didn't help. Grace set the journal down, her fingers quivering. She looked at Thomas, at his slack face, his closed eyes. He'd been here. All this time, he'd been here. Close enough to reach her, close enough to speak, and he'd stayed silent. Why didn't he come to me? Her voice broke on the question. Caldwell was still there, sitting in the corner, patient and steady. He thought you were better off without him. Well, that wasn't his choice to make. No, but it's the one he made anyway. Grace opened the final journal. The entries were recent, written in the last 6 months. Thomas's handwriting had deteriorated, unsteady and uneven, the words of a man whose body was failing. Day 7098. Diagnosis came back today. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. Dr. Caldwell says I have 6 months, maybe less. No treatment, no point. I should be scared, should be angry, but all I feel is tired. I want to see Grace. Want to explain. Want to tell her the truth about the night David died. The truth I've carried alone for 20 years. But what if she won't come? What if she hates me too much? What if telling her the truth only makes it worse? Caldwell says I owe her the choice. Says she deserves to know, even if it doesn't change anything. I think he's right. I'm so tired, Gracie. I'm ready to rest. But I can't go until I tell you the truth. Until I give you the one thing I should have given you 20 years ago. The truth. Grace turned the page. The final entry was dated 3 days ago. If you're reading this, I'm either unconscious or dead. Either way of them, I've run out of time. The night David died, I wasn't drunk. I know what the police report said. I know what everyone believed. But I swear to you, Grace, I only had one beer. David and I had a fight that night. He wanted to go to a party. I said no. He got angry, said I was controlling, that I didn't trust him. He stormed out, took his motorcycle. I waited an hour, then 2. Then I got worried and went looking for him. I found him on Highway 20, 5 miles from home. His bike was in the ditch. He was lying on the shoulder, bleeding, his leg bent wrong. I didn't think, didn't call for an ambulance. Just picked him up, put him in the truck, and drove. I was panicking. Couldn't think straight. Drove too fast, took the curves too hard. And then I lost control. We hit the pole at 70 miles an hour. David was already hurt from the motorcycle crash. But the second impact killed him. Not the first accident, the second. My accident. I killed my son, Grace. Not because I was drunk, because I was terrified and stupid and I made the wrong choice. The police found the beer can in my truck. I'd been drinking earlier, watching the game. It was enough to put me over the limit, enough to make everyone believe that's why I crashed. I let them believe it, because the truth was worse. The truth was that I killed David while trying to save him, and I couldn't live with that. So I left. Thought if I disappeared, you and your mother could move on, could blame me without having to see me every day, could heal. I was wrong, I know that now, but I can't take it back. I'm sorry, Gracie, for everything, for David, for leaving, for not being strong enough to stay. I love you. I always have. Dad Grace's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the journal. She read the entry again, then again. The words didn't change. Not drunk, trying to save David, lost control. 20 years. 20 years of hating him for being a drunk, for being careless, for choosing a beer over his son, and he'd let her believe it. Let the whole world believe it, because the truth was somehow worse. Did you know? Her voice was barely a whisper. Caldwell nodded. He told me 3 years ago. Made me promise not to tell anyone while he was alive. Why? Because he didn't want pity, didn't want understanding. He wanted to carry it alone. Grace stood, the journal falling from her grip. She crossed to the bed, looked down at her father's face. He looked peaceful, unburdened, as if telling the truth, even in writing, had lifted some terrible weight. You should have told me, she said. Her voice was steady now, cold and clear. You should have let me decide whether to forgive you. That was my right, my choice, and you took it from me. Thomas didn't answer. Couldn't answer. The ventilator hissed. The monitors beeped. Grace pressed her hand to his, felt the coolness of his skin, the fragile bones beneath. She thought about David, about the brother who'd taught her to ride a bike and tie her shoes and stand up to bullies. She thought about the boy who'd died on a highway, scared and alone, calling for his father. She thought about Thomas, driving through the night, David bleeding in the seat beside him, making a choice born of panic and love and desperation. She thought about 20 years of silence. I don't know if I can forgive you, she whispered. I don't know if I even want to. But she didn't let go of his hand. Dr. Caldwell found her there 2 hours later, still holding Thomas's hand, her eyes dry and red and empty. There's more, he said quietly. In the box. Photographs. Letters he wrote but never sent. Things he wanted you to have. Grace nodded but didn't move. He has a place here in town, Caldwell continued. A small house, a workshop. He left it to you in his will, along with instructions. He wants you to see it, says it will explain things the journals can't. I don't want his house. I know, but Grace, there are people there, people he helped, people who need to know what happened to him. Grace finally looked up. What people? Caldwell smiled, sad and small. Come see. When you were ready, Diddy. Thomas Morrison died at 4:17 that afternoon, quietly, without waking. Grace was there when the monitors flatlined, when the doctors came to turn off the machines, when they asked if she wanted a moment alone with the body. She said yes. When the room was empty, Grace sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her father's face. He looked younger in death, the lines of pain and guilt smoothed away. He looked like the man she remembered from childhood, the one who'd built her a tree house and taught her the names of trees and carried her on his shoulders when she got tired. I read them all, she said. Every journal, every word. The room was silent. I don't forgive you yet. Maybe I never will. But I understand now. I understand why you left. And I understand that you never really left at all. She leaned forward, pressed her lips to his forehead. His skin was already growing cold. Goodbye, Dad. She stood, walked to the door, didn't look back. In her car, she opened the wooden box one more time. Beneath the journals were photographs, dozens of them. Grace at her high school graduation, Grace at college, Grace in her white coat, receiving her medical degree. Every milestone of her life, captured from a distance by a father who couldn't be there, but couldn't stay away. The last photograph was different. It showed a small house, white paint and green shutters, with a workshop in the back. On the porch was a rocking chair, and beside it, a wooden sign. The sign read, David's Workshop. Grace stared at the photograph for a long time. Then she started the car and drove. She had a workshop to find, and a father, finally, to understand. Grace didn't leave the hospital that night. She told herself it was practical. The roads were dark, she was exhausted, and Dr. Caldwell had offered her the on-call room on the 3rd floor, but the truth was simpler and more complicated. She wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. Not until she'd read every word her father had written. The on-call room was small, sterile, lit by a fluorescent bulb that hummed like a distant swarm of bees. Grace sat on the narrow bed, the wooden box open beside her, and picked up journal number 8. The entries were longer now, more desperate. Thomas had left Spokane 3 days after David's funeral, driven east with no destination, just distance. He'd ended up in Missoula, Montana, sleeping in his truck in a Walmart parking lot until he found work framing houses for a contractor who didn't ask questions. Day 39. Worked 14 hours today. Hands are bleeding, don't care. The pain helps. Reminds me I'm still alive, even though I shouldn't be. Saw a kid today, maybe 16, helping his dad load lumber. They were laughing. The father ruffled the kid's hair. Such a small gesture. Such an ordinary moment. I had to walk away. Had to lock myself in the truck until I could breathe again. I don't deserve to breathe. Grace's chest felt tight. She set the journal down, pressed her palms against her eyes. This wasn't what she'd expected. She'd expected excuses, justifications, self-pity. But this was raw and broken, and so deeply sad that it made her own anger feel small and inadequate. She picked up the journal again. Day 43. Called home today. Emma answered. I hung up before she could say hello. But I heard her voice. She sounded tired. Older. I did that to her. I wanted to tell her I'm sorry, that I love her, that I think about her and Gracie every moment of every day. But what good are words? Words won't bring David back. Words won't undo what I did. I sent money instead. $2,000, all the cash I have. Mailed it from 3 towns over so they can't trace it back to me. It's not enough. Nothing will ever be enough, but it's all I have left to give. Grace's breath caught. She remembered that money, remembered her mother opening the envelope, trembling, convinced it was some kind of mistake or cruel joke. They'd used it to pay for David's headstone, the granite one with the angel carved into the top. Thomas had paid for his own son's grave marker and never known it. Grace read through the night. The journals painted a portrait of systematic self-destruction wrapped in rigid routine. Thomas worked until his body gave out, slept in cheap motels or his truck, ate 1 meal a day if he remembered. He attended AA meetings 3 times a week even though he wasn't drinking. Not because he was an alcoholic, but because those rooms were full of people who understood guilt and shame and the weight of consequences. Day 78. Group leader asked me tonight why I keep coming if I'm not drinking. I told him the truth. Because I need to be around people who know what it's like to destroy everything you love. People who understand that some mistakes don't get fixed. He said that's what AA is for, learning to forgive yourself. I told him I'm not here to forgive myself. I'm here to remember why I shouldn't. He looked sad, said that's not recovery, that's just suffering. I said I know. Grace turned the page, her fingers unsteady. The entries grew darker. Thomas wrote about standing on bridges, sitting in his truck with the engine running in closed garages, holding bottles of pills he'd bought from questionable sources. He wrote about the logistics of suicide, the way a broken mind could make death seem like mercy. But he also wrote about why he didn't do it. Day 112, almost did it today. Had the pills, had the note written, had the plan. Then I thought about Gracie finding out. Thought about her sitting in some counselor's office, trying to understand why her father killed her brother and then killed himself. Thought about the weight of that, the inheritance of that pain. I can't do that to her. I already took her brother. I can't take her father too, even if I'm a father in name only. So I flushed the pills, tore up the note, drove to a meeting instead. I don't know if I believe in God anymore. But if there is one, I'm asking for one thing: let Gracie grow up okay. Let her be happy. Let her have the life I stole from her. And keep me alive long enough to make sure she doesn't blame herself for any of this. Grace stood abruptly, the journal slipping from her lap. She crossed to the small window, pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Below, the parking lot was empty except for a few scattered cars, their windshields glinting under security lights. Her father had wanted to die, had planned it, had come within moments of ending his life, and he'd stopped because of her, because he was afraid she'd blame herself. The realization hit like a physical blow. For 20 years, she'd believed Thomas had abandoned them out of cowardice, out of inability to face consequences. But he hadn't abandoned them. He'd exiled himself, had chosen to suffer alone rather than inflict his suffering on her and Emma. It wasn't noble, it wasn't right, but it wasn't abandonment either. It was something else, something she didn't have a name for. Dr. Caldwell found her in the cafeteria at 6 in the morning, 4 empty paper cups on the table, the journals stacked beside her. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked. Grace shook her head. Her eyes felt gritty. Her mouth tasted like copper and exhaustion. "I'm on journal number 11, year 5. Caldwell sat down across from her, his expression careful. "And?" "He tried to kill himself, multiple times." "I know." "You knew?" Her voice came out sharper than intended. "You knew and you didn't tell me?" "It wasn't my story to tell." Caldwell's voice was gentle but firm. "Thomas made me promise I wouldn't contact you unless he was dying. He said you had a right to your anger, that taking that away from you would be another betrayal." Grace laughed, bitter and sharp. "So he protected my right to hate him. How noble." "Grace," Caldwell leaned forward, his palms flat on the table. "Your father was sick. Severe PTSD, major depression, survivor's guilt. So intense he could barely function. He was hospitalized twice in the first 5 years. Once after a failed overdose. Once after he drove his truck off a bridge in Idaho and somehow walked away. Grace's cup rattled against the saucer. What? The bridge was in the middle of nowhere. The truck went into a ravine. Should have killed him. He broke 3 ribs, fractured his collarbone, got a concussion. Somehow climbed out and walked 4 miles to a highway. The driver who picked him up said Thomas kept apologizing. Just kept saying, "I'm sorry," over and over, crying so hard he couldn't breathe. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand, your father didn't choose to leave you. His brain was broken, and he knew it. And he was terrified that if he stayed, you'd have to watch him fall apart. That you'd spend your teenage years taking care of a man who couldn't take care of himself. Grace stood, her chair scraping loud against linoleum. That wasn't his decision to make. I was his daughter. I deserved, what? To sacrifice your childhood for his mental illness? To put your life on hold to manage his trauma? Caldwell's voice was sharper now. Grace, I've been a physician for 38 years. I've seen what happens to families when one person's mental health crisis becomes everyone's full-time job. It destroys them. All of them. Thomas knew that. So he made a choice. Maybe the wrong choice, but a choice made out of love, not cowardice. Grace sat back down slowly. Her hands were shaking again. I don't know how to process this. You don't have to. Not right now. Just keep reading. The story gets better, different. He found his way out. The journals from years 4 and 5 showed the slow, painful climb toward stability. Thomas had moved to Spokane, Washington, settling in a small town called Riverside. He had found steady work at a custom furniture shop, started seeing a therapist twice a week, got on medication that actually helped. And he'd started watching Grace, day 1467. Drove to Spokane today, parked outside Gracie's high school, waited until the final bell rang. She walked out with a group of girls, all of them laughing. She's taller now, looks like her mother. Same dark hair, same serious eyes. But when she smiles, she looks like David. I wanted to call out to her, wanted to cross the street and tell her I'm sorry, that I love her, that I've thought about her every single day, but I didn't, because I'm a stranger to her now. And that's what I chose when I left. She got into a friend's car. They drove away. I sat in my truck and cried. But she looked happy, and maybe that's enough. Grace's eyes stung. She turned the pages faster now, reading entry after entry of Thomas watching her life from a distance. Her high school graduation. He'd been there in the back row, leaving before the ceremony ended. Her college move-in day. He'd followed her to Seattle, watched her carry boxes into her dorm, seen her mother hug her goodbye. Her acceptance to medical school. He'd hired a private investigator to send him updates, to photograph major milestones. 20 years of surveillance, 20 years of silent, invisible presence. Day 2, 1841. Gracie is a doctor now. I saw her photo in the hospital newsletter. Dr. Grace Morrison joins via psychology department. She specializes in trauma, in helping people heal from the worst moments of their lives. Of course she does. Of course my brilliant, compassionate daughter chose to spend her life fixing what I broke. I wonder if she knows she's healing me too. Every time I read about her work, about the veterans she's helping, I think David would be so proud. Emma would be so proud. I'm proud too, even though I have no right to be. She's better than I ever was, better than I ever could be, and she did it without me. Maybe because of that. I tell myself it was worth it. The absence, the pain, all of it. Some days I almost believe it. Grace closed the journal. Her face was wet. When had she started crying? She wiped her eyes roughly, angry at the tears, angry at the grief, angry at the impossible complexity of loving and hating someone at the same time. He watched me, she said to the empty cafeteria. For 20 years, he watched me. The words echoed off tile and glass. Dr. Caldwell drove her to Thomas's house that afternoon. Grace had resisted. What was the point? Thomas was dead. Reading his journals was one thing, but walking through his home felt invasive, voyeuristic. But Caldwell had insisted. There are things you can't learn from words, he'd said. Things you have to see. The house was small, a one-story craftsman with peeling paint and an overgrown yard. Caldwell unlocked the door, but he didn't follow Grace inside. Take your time, he said. I'll be in the car. The interior smelled like coffee and sawdust. The furniture was sparse, a worn couch, a kitchen table with one chair, a small television that looked 20 years old. On the mantel sat 3 photographs in hand-carved frames. David at 12, holding a fish. Grace's mother on her wedding day. And Grace herself at 5, sitting on Thomas's shoulders at the county fair. Grace picked up her own photograph, studied the faces. Thomas looked young, healthy, happy, and she looked safe, loved. Like a child who believed her father would always be there. She set the frame down and moved through the house. The bedroom was monastic, a single bed with military corners, a dresser with nothing on top, a closet containing 5 identical work shirts and 3 pairs of jeans. No decoration, no personality, just function. The bathroom held a toothbrush, generic shampoo, a prescription bottle for antidepressants. Grace picked up the bottle. Sertraline 100 milligrams prescribed by Dr. Henry Caldwell. The label was dated 3 months ago. In the kitchen, she found a calendar on the wall, each day marked with small notations. Meeting 7 p.m., work 6 a.m. to 4 p.m., workshop Saturday. The current month showed the same pattern repeating. Work, meetings, workshop, work, meetings, workshop. A life of rigid routine, of structure imposed on chaos. Grace opened the refrigerator. Milk, eggs, bread, lunch meat, a single beer unopened, dust on the bottle. She pulled it out, checked the expiration date. It had expired 4 years ago. He'd kept it there as a test, a daily reminder of the choice he'd made. She put the beer back, closed the refrigerator, and walked to the back door. The workshop was everything the house wasn't. Chaotic, full of personality. Tools hung on pegboards in organized rows. Sawdust covered the floor. Half-finished projects crowded every surface. Rocking chairs, toy chests, picture frames, small wooden boxes. So many boxes. Grace moved through the space slowly, her fingers trailing over smooth wood. On the far wall hung a corkboard covered in photographs and notes. Children, dozens of them, holding wooden objects and smiling. Thank you cards written in careful handwriting. Thank you for my box, Mr. Morrison. I keep my mom's necklace in it. Sarah, age 17, the rocking chair you made for my baby is beautiful. She falls asleep in it every night. Janet, you told me I could make something good even though I messed up. You were right. Marcus, there were more. 30, 40, 50. All thanking Thomas for teaching them, helping them, giving them something beautiful to hold on to. Grace found a filing cabinet in the corner, pulled it open. Inside were manila folders, each labeled with a name and date. She pulled one at random. Sarah Mitchell, age 16 to 17, 2018 to 2019. Mother died of overdose. Father unknown. Placed in foster care, age 14. Angry, withdrawn, doesn't trust adults. Started with simple cutting board. Showed aptitude. Built jewelry box for mother's necklace over 8 weeks. Cried when she finished. First emotion I've seen from her. Progress. Grace pulled another folder. Marcus Chen, age 15 to 17, 2016 to 2018. History of theft, vandalism. Parents incarcerated. Living at Hope House Group Home. Started angry, wanted to quit. Convinced him to try one more week. Built 17 projects over 2 years. Real talent. Helped teach younger kids his final 6 months. Last I heard, enrolled in community college carpentry program. Proud of this kid, folder after folder, child after child, all broken in some way, all given tools and wood and patient instruction, all creating something beautiful. Grace sank onto a workbench stool, folders scattered around her. This was what Thomas had done with his 20 years. Not just surviving, but giving. Taking his own brokenness and using it to help other broken people build themselves back together. She thought about her own work at the VA, the veterans she counseled, the PTSD and trauma and grief she helped them process. She'd thought she'd chosen that path in spite of Thomas, but maybe she'd chosen it because of him. Maybe they'd both been doing the same work, just in different ways. The thought made her chest ache. She found the last journal that evening sitting in Thomas's workshop as light faded through the windows. It was different from the others, leather-bound, expensive, the pages thick and creamy. On the first page in careful script, for Grace, the truth about the night David died. Grace's hands were unsteady as she turned the page. Dearest Gracie, if you're reading this, I'm dead or close to it. And if Dr. Caldwell gave you the other journals, you know most of my story. But there's one part I never wrote about, the part that matters most. The night David died, I wasn't drunk. I know that's not what the police report said. I know that's not what everyone believed. But I swear to you, on everything I have left, I only had one beer that night. One. I was barely over the limit. Not drunk, just barely impaired. But that's not why David died. He died because I panicked. Grace read faster now, her heart pounding. David and I fought that night. He wanted to go to Jason Parker's party. I said no, it was a school night, and I knew Jason's parents were out of town. David got angry, said I didn't trust him, said I was controlling. We yelled, he stormed out. He took his motorcycle, the one I'd bought him for his 16th birthday 3 months earlier. I waited an hour, then 2. I called his phone, got voicemail, called Jason's house, no answer, started to worry. So I went looking for him. I found him on Highway 20, 5 miles from home. His bike was in the ditch. He was lying on the shoulder, his leg bent wrong, blood on his face, conscious but in shock. I should have called 911, should have waited for professionals, should have done anything except what I did. But I was terrified. My son was hurt, bleeding, and I couldn't think. So I picked him up, put him in the truck, and drove. I was going to take him to the hospital myself. It was only 15 minutes away. I thought I could get him there faster than an ambulance could arrive. I drove too fast, took the curves too hard. David was crying in the passenger seat, saying his leg hurt, asking if he was going to be okay. I kept telling him, yes, we're almost there, you're going to be fine. Then I lost control. The truck went into a slide. I overcorrected. We hit the telephone pole at 70 miles an hour. David's injuries from the motorcycle crash wouldn't have killed him. He had a fractured femur, some road rash, possible concussion. Serious but treatable. But the impact from the truck crash, that killed him. Massive head trauma. He died instantly. I killed my son while trying to save him. Grace couldn't breathe, couldn't see. Oh, the words swam on the page. The police found the beer can in my truck. I'd been drinking earlier, watching the game. It put me at .08 BAC, just over the limit. They assumed that's why I crashed, and I let them believe it. Because the truth was worse. The truth was that I'd made a choice in panic and fear, and that choice killed David. The truth was that if I just called 911, if I just waited 10 minutes for professionals, my son would still be alive. I couldn't live with that truth. So I let everyone believe I was a drunk driver who killed his son through negligence. Better to be hated for being careless than for being incompetent. Better to be a villain than a fool. I'm sorry, Gracie, for all of it. For fighting with David that night. For not calling an ambulance. For the crash. For leaving you and your mother alone with the grief. For letting you hate me for the wrong reasons. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But you deserve the truth. And I was too much of a coward to give it to you while I was alive. I love you. I'm sorry, Dadgo. Grace set the journal down with trembling hands. She stood, walked to the workshop door, stepped out into the evening air. The sky was darkening, stars beginning to emerge. Somewhere a dog barked. A car passed on a distant street. Thomas hadn't been drunk, hadn't been careless, had been trying to save David, and had killed him anyway. For 20 years, Grace had hated him for the wrong reasons, had built her entire identity around being the daughter of a drunk driver, a man too weak and selfish to face consequences. But he'd faced consequences every day, had punished himself more severely than any court could have, had exiled himself not out of cowardice, but out of guilt too massive to carry in the presence of the people he'd failed. Grace thought about her work with veterans, the ones who came back from war carrying the weight of split-second decisions made under impossible pressure. The ones who'd lost friends to IEDs, to friendly fire, to choices that looked wrong in hindsight but felt right in the moment. She told them the same thing every time. You did the best you could with the information you had. Guilt is natural, but it's not the same as fault. Would she say that to Thomas? Could she? She didn't know, but for the first time in 20 years, she understood him. And understanding, she was learning, was the first step towards something else, something that might eventually become forgiveness. Grace returned to the hospital at midnight. Thomas was still unconscious, still breathing with mechanical precision. She sat beside his bed and opened the final journal, the one Caldwell had told her about, but that she hadn't yet read. It contained only one entry, dated 2 weeks ago. Grace is coming. Caldwell called her. She'll be here soon. I don't know if I'll wake up before she arrives. The cancer is moving fast, and the pain medication makes everything hazy. But I need to write this down. Need to say it even if I never get to say it to her face. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. What I'm asking for is understanding. I left because I loved you. I stayed away because I loved you. I watched you from a distance because I loved you. Everything I did, the workshops, the kids, the boxes, was my way of being the father to someone that I couldn't be to you. It wasn't enough. I know that. Nothing I did will ever make up for not being there when you graduated, when you became a doctor, when you needed me. But I did the best I could with the wreckage I'd made of myself. I hope someday you'll understand that. I hope someday you'll be able to think of me without anger. I hope you'll be happy, Gracie. That's all I've ever wanted. Your happiness. I love you, always have, always will, even when I wasn't there to show it. Grace closed the journal. She looked at Thomas's face, peaceful in unconsciousness, and felt something crack inside her chest. Not breaking, opening. She reached out, took his hand. His skin was cool, papery, so different from the strong hands she remembered from childhood. I read them, she whispered. All of them. Every word. The machines beeped. The ventilator hissed. I don't forgive you yet. I don't know if I can, but I understand now, and maybe that's enough for today. She sat with him through the night, holding his hand, watching the monitors track the failing rhythms of his life. At 4:17 in the morning, Thomas Morrison's heart stopped. Grace was there when it happened. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just held his hand as the machines flatlined, as the nurses came to turn everything off, as the doctor pronounced the time of death. When they asked if she needed a moment alone, she said yes. And when the room was empty, Grace Morrison leaned down and kissed her father's forehead. Goodbye, Dad, she whispered. Thank you for the truth, even if it came too late. She stood, walked to the door, and didn't look back. There was work to do, a workshop to see, a legacy to understand, and somewhere buried under 20 years of anger, the beginning of forgiveness waiting to be built. The funeral was small. Grace had expected that. Thomas Morrison had spent 20 years making himself invisible, and even in death, he remained a ghost. 6 people attended the graveside service at Riverside Cemetery. Grace, Dr. Henry Caldwell, the funeral director, and 3 older men who introduced themselves as members of Thomas's AA group. Men who'd known him as Tom, the quiet carpenter who showed up every Tuesday night and listened more than he spoke. The pastor, a woman Grace had never met, read from Ecclesiastes. Something about time, about seasons, about healing. Grace didn't listen. She stood beside the casket, her hands clasped in front of her, her gaze fixed on the polished wood, and watched as they lowered her father into the ground beside an empty plot. David's plot, the one their mother had purchased 20 years ago, back when she'd still believed Thomas might come home. Emma Morrison had died 8 years ago. Heart attack, sudden and clean. She'd never stopped wearing her wedding ring, never stopped leaving the porch light on at night, just in case. Grace wondered if Thomas had known, if he'd watched from a distance as they buried Emma, too much of a coward to show his face even then. The thought made her angry. Good. Anger was easier than grief. When the service ended, Dr. Caldwell approached, his expression careful. Will you come to the house now? Grace looked at the fresh grave, at the temporary marker that read, Thomas James Morrison, beloved father. Someone, Caldwell probably, had added those last 2 words. Grace hadn't authorized them, wasn't sure she agreed with them. I don't know what I'm supposed to find there, she said. Neither did I the first time Thomas showed it to me. But Grace, there are people waiting, people who deserve to know what happened to him, and people who can help you understand who he really was. I've read 20 journals. I understand plenty. Caldwell shook his head. You understand his pain, his regret. But you don't understand his purpose. Not yet. The house was a small craftsman on the east side of town, tucked between a community garden and an empty lot that had once been a church. White paint, green shutters, exactly as the photograph had shown. The porch held two rocking chairs, one large, one child-sized, and a wind chime made of copper pipe that sang softly in the breeze. Grace sat in her car for 5 minutes, staring at the front door. This was where her father had lived, where he'd eaten breakfast and read the newspaper and gone to sleep every night, where he'd written in those journals, pouring his heart onto pages she was never supposed to see, where he'd been alone. The thought shouldn't have hurt, but it did. Caldwell's truck pulled up behind her. He got out, moved with the careful deliberateness of a man who knew he was intruding. The keys under the mat. He said you'd know to look there. Grace did know. When she was 7, Thomas had locked himself out of their old house and lifted the mat to find the spare key. David had laughed, called him absent-minded. Thomas had ruffled David's hair and said some habits die hard. Grace climbed the porch steps, lifted the mat. The key was brass, slightly tarnished, warm from the sun. Her hands shook as she fitted it into the lock. The door opened. The house smelled like sawdust and coffee. The front room was sparse, a couch, a small television, a bookshelf crammed with carpentry manuals and AA literature. On the mantel sat 3 photographs in handmade frames. Grace crossed the room, her steps echoing on hardwood. The first photograph showed David at 12, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a fish he'd caught. Grace remembered that day. Remembered Thomas teaching David to bait the hook, to be patient, to wait for the strike. The second photograph showed Grace's mother on their wedding day, young and radiant in a simple white dress. The third photograph showed Grace herself at 5 years old, sitting on Thomas's shoulders at the county fair, her hands tangled in his hair, both of them laughing. Grace picked up the frame, tears blurring her sight. She couldn't remember this moment, couldn't remember ever being that happy with him. But the photograph didn't lie. Once, a lifetime ago, they'd been a family. He looked at those every morning, Caldwell said from the doorway, part of his routine, coffee, photographs, then work. Grace set the frame down carefully. Where's the workshop? Out back. But Grace, before you go out there, you should know it's not empty. The workshop was larger than the house, a converted garage with skylights and workbenches lining every wall. The air was thick with the smell of wood, pine and cedar and oak, fresh cut and sanded smooth. Tools hung in precise rows, chisels, saws, planes, all gleaming and well-maintained. And everywhere, there was wood. Rocking chairs in various stages of completion. Toy chests with hand-carved animals on the lids. Small wooden boxes, dozens of them, each one slightly different. Cutting boards, picture frames. A cradle, half-finished, the wood still raw. Grace moved through the space slowly, her fingers trailing over the smooth surfaces. Every piece was beautiful. Every piece was made with care. This wasn't the work of a man destroying himself. This was the work of a man building something, creating, giving. On the far wall hung a corkboard covered in photographs and thank you notes. Grace stepped closer, pulse quickening. The photographs showed children, teenagers, young adults, all of them holding wooden objects, boxes, mostly, some with their names carved into the lids. The thank you notes were written in various hands, some neat, some nearly illegible. Thank you for my treasure box. I keep my mom's ring in it. Sarah, Mr. Morrison, the rocking chair you made for my baby is perfect. She falls asleep in it every night. Janet W. You told me I could make something beautiful even though I messed up. You were right. Thank you. Marcus, there were dozens of them, 50, maybe more. What is this? Grace whispered. Caldwell had followed her into the workshop. He leaned against a workbench, his arms crossed. Thomas volunteered at Hope House for 15 years. It's a group home for kids in foster care, kids aging out of the system. He taught them woodworking every Saturday, made them each a box when they left, something to keep their important things in, something that was theirs. Grace touched one of the photographs. A girl, maybe 16, holding a wooden box and grinning. Her eyes were familiar. Grace had seen eyes like that in her patients. Wary, haunted, not quite trusting joy. He never mentioned this, not in any of the journals, because it wasn't about him. It was about them. Caldwell moved to a filing cabinet, pulled out a folder. He kept records, names, dates, what they built. He wanted to make sure every kid was documented in case they ever came back looking. Grace opened the folder. Inside were intake forms, photographs, progress notes written in Thomas's careful handwriting. Marcus T., age 15, arrived angry, doesn't trust adults, started with a simple cutting board. Mismeasured twice, wanted to quit, talked him through it. By the end, he was smiling. Small progress, but progress. Sarah M., age 17, mother died of overdose. Keeps to herself. Asked if she could make a box for her mother's ring. Worked in silence for 3 weeks. When she finished, she cried. First time I've seen her show emotion. Told her it was okay to miss her mother. She said no one ever said that before. Heartbreaking. Caleb R., age 16, in and out of juvie. Told me woodworking was stupid. I said he didn't have to like it, just had to show up. He came back every week for 2 years, made 17 projects, gave them all away. Kid has a gift for this. Hope he finds his way. Grace sank onto a stool, the folder trembling in her grip. Page after page of children. Broken, angry, lost children. And Thomas had been there week after week, teaching them to measure and cut in sand, teaching them that they could make something beautiful with their own hands. Why didn't he tell me? The question came out raw, almost a sob. I asked him that once, Caldwell said quietly. He said you'd think he was trying to replace David, to atone. He didn't want you to think this was about guilt. What was it about then? Love, the only kind he knew how to give anymore. Grace stayed in the workshop until dark, reading through every file, looking at every photograph. She learned that Thomas had helped 37 kids over 15 years, that 12 of them had stayed in touch, sending Christmas cards and graduation announcements, that one of them, Marcus, the angry 15-year-old, had become a carpenter himself, now ran his own business in Seattle, that Thomas had never taken credit for any of it. She found a drawer full of letters, all addressed to her, all unsent. Birthday cards for every year she'd been alive. Graduation cards. A card that said, "Congratulations on your engagement," even though Grace had never been engaged. Thomas had seen her with a man once, assumed, hoped. The last letter was dated 2 months ago. Dearest Grace, if you're reading this, I've finally run out of time. I hope Dr. Caldwell gave you the journals. I hope you read them. I hope they helped you understand, even a little. I'm writing now because there's one more thing you need to know. One more truth I couldn't say while I was alive. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I loved you too much to stay. Every time I looked at you, I saw your brother, saw the pain in your eyes, saw the way you flinched when I entered a room. You were 15 years old, Gracie, and you'd already lost everything. I couldn't bear to be a constant reminder of that loss. I thought if I left, you could heal, could move forward, could become the person you were meant to be without me dragging you down. I was wrong. I know that now. I should have stayed, should have fought for you, should have been brave enough to face your anger and your grief and help you through it. But I wasn't brave. I was broken. And I didn't know how to fix myself, let alone you. So I left. And I spent 20 years trying to do some good in the world, trying to be the father to other people's children that I couldn't be to you. It wasn't enough. I know that. Nothing I did will ever make up for abandoning you. But I need you to know, not a day passed that I didn't think about you, not a day that I didn't love you, not a day that I wasn't proud of the woman you became. You're a doctor, Gracie. You heal people. You take their pain and you make it bearable. That's the most important work in the world. And you do it because you're good, because you're strong, because you're better than I ever was. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Not for me, I'll be gone, but for you, because holding on to anger is like holding on to poison. It'll kill you slowly, from the inside out. Let me go, sweetheart. Let David go. Let all of it go. Love, be happy, find someone who deserves you. Build a life that would make your brother proud. And if you can, when you think of me, try to remember the good times. The treehouse, the fishing trips, the way I used to carry you on my shoulders. Try to remember that I loved you, Even when I failed you, even when I wasn't there, especially then. I love you, Gracie, always. Dad, Grace folded the letter with shaking hands. She sat in the quiet workshop, surrounded by the evidence of her father's silent penance. And finally, she let herself cry. She cried for David, for the brother who'd died too young. She cried for her mother, who'd waited for a man who would never come home. She cried for Thomas, who'd spent 20 years punishing himself for a moment of panic, a terrible choice made in love and fear. And she cried for herself, for the 15-year-old girl who'd lost her father and her brother in one night, for the woman who'd spent 2 decades nursing a hatred that was easier than grief. When the tears stopped, she felt hollow, empty, but also lighter, as if something heavy had been cut away. She stood, wiped her face, and looked around the workshop one more time. The boxes, the chairs, the evidence of 37 children who'd been given a chance because one broken man had decided to build something instead of destroy himself. That was his legacy, not the journals, not the letters. This, creation, hope, second chances. Grace could walk away, could sell the house, donate the tools, scatter Thomas's ashes and never think about him again. Or she could do what he'd done. She could build something. The first person who came to the workshop was Sarah. Grace didn't know her at first. The girl in the photograph had been 16, hollow-eyed, clutching a wooden box. The woman who knocked on the workshop door 3 days after the funeral was 28, dressed in scrubs, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. "I'm looking for Mr. Morrison," she said. Then she saw Grace's face and stopped. "Oh, you're his daughter. I saw the obituary." Grace nodded, suddenly unsure. "I'm Grace. Sarah Mitchell. I used to come here on Saturdays. Your father, he taught me woodworking when I was at Hope House." She held up her left hand. A simple gold band glinted on her ring finger. "I still have the box he made me. I keep my mother's ring in it. The one I wear now belonged to my mother-in-law, but Mom's ring lives in that box. Always will." Grace stepped back from the doorway. "Come in, please." Sarah entered slowly, her eyes sweeping over the familiar space. She touched a workbench, a set of chisels, her expression soft with memory. "Is it true he's really gone?" "Yes. I'm sorry, he was important to a lot of us." Sarah turned, and Grace saw tears in her eyes. "Do you know what he told me the first day I came here? I was 17, angry at the world, angry at my mom for dying and leaving me alone. I told him I didn't want to make anything, that there was no point." "What did he say?" "He said, then don't make it for you, make it for someone else. Make it because the world needs more beautiful things and you can create beauty. That's power, Sarah. Don't waste it on anger." Sarah laughed, wiping her eyes. "I thought he was full of it, but I started anyway, and he was right. Creating something, it helped. It gave me control when everything else was chaos." Grace felt something shift in her chest. "He wrote about you in his records. He said you cried when you finished your mother's box." "I did. He let me. Didn't try to fix it or make it better. Just sat with me while I cried. No one had done that before." Sarah looked at Grace directly. "What are you going to do with this place?" Grace had been asking herself the same question for 3 days. "I don't know yet. Can I make a suggestion? Please, keep it open. The kids at Hope House, they still need this. The current volunteers are great, but none of them have the patience your father had, the skill, the way he made you feel like you mattered." Sarah's voice cracked. "He saved my life, Dr. Morrison. I don't mean that as a metaphor. I mean literally. I was planning to kill myself the week I started coming here. And then he handed me a piece of wood and a chisel and said, 'Let's make something.' So I did. And then I made something else. And then I wanted to see what I could make next. And somewhere along the way, I stopped wanting to die." Grace couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She thought of the journals, of Thomas's words. "I don't know how to live with this, but he'd figured it out. He'd found a way to live by giving other people reasons to live." "I'll keep it open," Grace heard herself say. "I don't know how yet, but I'll figure it out." Sarah smiled, bright and genuine. "Thank you, and Dr. Morrison, I'm sorry for your loss. I know he wasn't perfect. None of us are. But he was good. In the ways that counted, he was really, really good." Over the next 2 weeks, 7 more of Thomas's former students came to the workshop. Marcus, the angry 15-year-old who'd become a carpenter. Caleb, who'd been in and out of juvenile detention and was now a social worker. Elena, who brought her 3-year-old daughter to see Mr. Tom's workshop because she'd told her little girl so many stories about the kind man who'd taught her to build. Each of them shared their stories. Each of them had been saved, in small or large ways, by a quiet man with patient hands and an infinite capacity for listening. And each of them asked the same question. Would the workshop stay open? Grace called Dr. Caldwell on a Wednesday evening, 2 weeks after the funeral. I need help, she said. Anything. I want to turn the workshop into a nonprofit, a real program, not just Thomas volunteering on weekends. I want to hire instructors, get insurance, make it official, but I don't know where to start. There was a pause. Then Caldwell's voice, warm with something Grace couldn't quite name. I was hoping you'd say that. I've already started the paperwork. Thomas asked me to, about a year ago. He wanted to make sure the work continued after he was gone. He just didn't know if you'd want to be involved. Grace looked around her apartment, at the medical journals stacked on her coffee table, the framed degrees on her wall. She'd built a good life, a meaningful life, but it was a life shaped by absence, by the hole her father had left. Maybe it was time to fill that hole with something other than anger. What do I need to do? She asked. Grace quit her job at the VA 6 months after Thomas died. Not out of grief, but out of clarity. She'd spent 10 years helping veterans process trauma from a clinical distance. Now she wanted to help with her hands. She moved into Thomas's house. The furniture stayed the same, sparse, functional, exactly what she needed and nothing more. But she added photographs. David's senior picture, her mother at 40, Grace herself receiving her doctorate. The house began to feel less like a shrine and more like a home. She learned carpentry from Marcus 3 evenings a week. Her first cutting board was a disaster. Uneven, splintered, the measurements all wrong. Marcus laughed and showed her how to fix it. Her second attempt was better. By the 3rd month, she'd made her first box, small and simple, with dovetail joints that actually held. She cried when she finished it. Marcus pretended not to notice. On weekends, she ran workshops for Hope House kids, slowly building her confidence with chisels and saws. The first Saturday, 12 teenagers showed up. Half of them left within an hour. The other half stayed, suspicious and resistant, but they stayed. Grace told them about David, about the accident, about 20 years of hatred, about the journals and the workshop and the 37 kids who'd found hope in sawdust and wood glue. She told them about forgiveness, not the easy kind, the kind that happened in movies with swelling music and tearful embraces, but the hard kind, the kind that took years, the kind that meant choosing, every single day, to let go of anger and pick up something else. Hope, purpose, love. One girl, Jade, 16, arms covered in self-inflicted scars, asked, "Did you forgive him? Your dad?" Grace looked at the workshop around them, at the boxes stacked in the corner, at Marcus demonstrating proper chisel technique to a sullen boy with a black eye. "I'm working on it," she said honestly. "Every day, I'm working on it, and some days are harder than others. But I'm trying because he tried, and that has to count for something." Jade nodded slowly. "Okay, show me how to make a box." A year after Thomas's death, Grace met Daniel. He was a contractor, mid-40s, with calloused hands and laugh lines around his eyes. He'd known Thomas, had helped him build the original workshop expansion 5 years ago. He showed up one Saturday to donate lumber and stayed to help teach. They worked side by side for 3 months before he asked her to dinner. 6 months after that, he proposed with the ring box he'd made himself. Walnut with brass hinges, her initials carved into the lid. They married quietly 2 years later, just family and a few close friends. Marcus was Daniel's best man. Sarah was Grace's maid of honor. The reception was held in the workshop, surrounded by projects the kids had made. Emma was born the following spring. Grace named her daughter after her mother, but gave her Thomas's middle name, James, as a second middle name. Emma James Morrison Chen, a bridge between past and present, between grief and joy. When Emma was 3 months old, Grace took her to the cemetery for the first time. She knelt between 2 graves, Thomas on the left, David on the right, her mother buried in another cemetery across town. "This is your grandfather," Grace whispered to the baby in her arms. "And this is your Uncle David. They would have loved you so much." Emma gurgled, grabbed at Grace's hair. Grace stayed until the sun began to set, talking to the stones, telling Thomas and David about the workshop, about the kids, about Emma, about forgiveness, and how it wasn't a destination but a journey, and she was still walking. 3 years after Thomas died, Grace stood in the newly renovated workshop, now twice as large, with a waiting list of kids who wanted to participate, and watched as Jade, now 19, demonstrated proper sanding technique to a group of new students. Jade had aged out of Hope House the previous year, but had stayed on as a volunteer. She'd made 62 boxes now, each one more intricate than the last. She'd been accepted to a community college on a scholarship and was studying furniture design. She wanted to open her own studio someday, she told Grace. Wanted to teach kids like her that broken didn't mean worthless. The nonprofit was thriving. They'd served over 100 children in 3 years. 93% of them stayed in school, avoided the juvenile justice system, found pathways forward. The numbers were good, but Grace cared more about the stories. About Marcus teaching a boy with ADHD to focus through repetition. About Sarah volunteering every other weekend, bringing her daughter to see where her mommy learned to build. About Jade finding purpose in teaching what she'd been taught. Dr. Caldwell, now 73, served on the board of directors. His health was failing, early Parkinson's, tremors in his hands, but he came to every board meeting, every fundraiser, every Saturday open house. Thomas would be proud, he told Grace one afternoon, watching the kids work. Grace nodded. "I hope so. I know so." 5 years after the funeral, Grace received a call from the mayor's office. David's workshop had been nominated for the Governor's Award for Community Service. They won. The ceremony was held in Seattle, formal and overwhelming, with politicians and cameras and speeches. Grace stood at the podium in a dress Daniel had insisted she buy, looking out at the crowd of strangers, and thought about Thomas, about the man who'd hidden from the world for 20 years, who'd worked in silence and anonymity, who'd never wanted recognition. "My father didn't do this work for awards," she said into the microphone. "He did it because he didn't know what else to do with his guilt, because building something beautiful felt better than destroying himself, because 37 kids needed him, and for once in his broken life, he could be what someone needed." She paused, her voice catching. "This award isn't for me, it's for him, and for David, my brother, whose death set all of this in motion. And for every kid who's ever walked into that workshop thinking they're worthless and walked out knowing they can create something beautiful." The applause was thunderous. Grace barely heard it. 10 years after Thomas Morrison died, Grace stood in front of the brand new David's Workshop Community Center and watched as 300 people gathered for the dedication ceremony. The building was beautiful, 3,000 square feet of workshop space, classrooms, a small gallery to display student work, office space for counselors and social workers. Funded by grants, donations, and a generous gift from Marcus, whose carpentry business had become one of the most successful in the Pacific Northwest. Dr. Caldwell sat in the front row, silver-haired and frail now, a walker beside his chair. He was 83, his Parkinson's advanced, but he'd refused to miss this day. Grace's daughter, 6-year-old Emma, sat beside him, swinging her legs and clutching a small wooden box she'd made herself just last week. Daniel stood behind them, his hand on Emma's shoulder, beaming with pride. "My father once told me that broken didn't mean worthless," Grace began, her voice steady and clear. "He didn't tell me with words. He showed me through his actions, through 15 years of showing up, of teaching, of giving broken kids the tools to build themselves back together." She paused, looking at the building behind her. "This center is his legacy, but it's also David's legacy. My brother died at 16, and for a long time I thought that was the end of his story. But it's not, because his name is on this building, because kids who never knew him will learn to create in his memory, because love doesn't end when people leave us. It transforms, it builds, it grows." She looked at Emma, who waved enthusiastically. "I forgave my father. It took me years. It wasn't easy, and there are still days when I'm angry about the time we lost. But I choose to focus on what he gave rather than what he took. And what he gave was this, The understanding that we can build beautiful things from our pain, that we can choose creation over destruction, that we can be more than our worst moments. She stepped back from the podium. Marcus cut the ribbon. The crowd applauded. And Grace Morrison, daughter of Thomas, sister of David, mother of Emma, walked into the new building and picked up a chisel. There was work to do. After the ceremony, after the crowd dispersed and the photographers packed up their equipment, Grace drove to Riverside Cemetery alone. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She parked near the Morrison family plot and walked across the grass, carrying two small wooden boxes. She knelt between the graves. Thomas's headstone now had a proper marker, granite with bronze letters. Thomas James Morrison, beloved father. He built beauty from broken pieces. David's headstone, unchanged for 20 years, read simply, David Michael Morrison, forever young, forever loved. Grace placed the two boxes on the graves. She'd spent 6 months making them, working late into the night after Emma went to bed. Both were cedar with dovetail joints, polished until they glowed. Inside Thomas's box, a photo of him holding baby Grace, a copy of his final journal entry, and a handwritten note she'd composed that morning. Inside David's box, his hospital bracelet from the night he died, a photo of him at 16 holding that basketball, and the same note. The note read, I forgive you both, not because what happened was okay, but because holding on to anger was killing me the way guilt killed Dad. I choose to build instead. I choose to create. I choose to live. Thank you for teaching me that broken things can become beautiful. Thank you for the workshop, for the kids, for the legacy that goes on. I'm happy now, finally, and I think you both would be proud of that. Love always, Grace. She placed the boxes on the cold granite, pressed her palm to Thomas's headstone, then David's. I'm okay now, she whispered. You can rest. The wind picked up, rustling through the maple trees Thomas had helped plant when the cemetery was new. Grace remembered him telling her about it once, back when she was small, how he'd volunteered to landscape the cemetery because he wanted to make sure it was beautiful, a place where people could remember their loved ones surrounded by life, not just death. Even then, he'd been building. Grace stood, brushed dirt from her knees. She looked at the boxes one more time, at the graves that held her father and brother, at the space beside them where her mother rested in another cemetery miles away. I love you, she said, all of you, and I forgive you, and I'm letting you go. She walked back to her car as the sun dipped below the horizon. Daniel was waiting at home with Emma. There was dinner to make, a bedtime story to read, a child to raise who would never know her grandfather but would know his work. That was enough. It had to be. And for the first time in 20 years, Grace Morrison believed it truly was. She drove home through the gathering darkness, the road ahead illuminated by headlights, the past finally, blessedly, behind her. In the workshop, in the boxes, in the hands of children learning to build, Thomas Morrison lived on. Not as the man who killed his son, not as the father who abandoned his family, but as someone who'd taken the worst moment of his life and transformed it into hope for others. That was forgiveness. Not forgetting, not excusing, but choosing to see the whole person. The failures and the triumphs, the cowardice in the courage, the destruction in the building. Grace parked in her driveway, saw the lights on in the kitchen, heard Emma's laughter through the window. She smiled and went inside to her family, to her life, to the future she'd built from broken pieces.